74 Gear is a YouTube channel created by an actual 747 captain, Kelsey Hughes, in which he tells stories about his flying career, as well as debunking movie myths about what a 747 is truly capable of doing. And in his several videos on YouTube, his channel tells actual ATC, that's the Air Flight Tower Control, and pilot interactions, which get kind of raunchy, but his videos also take a moment to describe in lay terms what happened in flight accidents, crashes, near misses, and he tells of incredible landings. In one of his video accounts, he describes a flight which arrived at O'Hare Airport, but Chicago was experiencing an incredibly foggy situation where the flight crew could not see the runway. Requesting assistance, the air traffic control tower informed them to just sit tight and remain in a holding pattern above the airport until they could fully assess their situation. Realizing they weren't going to land for a while, the captain and co-pilot got out the manual to study the landing pattern at the airport and the safety check procedures manual. After holding high above Chicago, the aircraft warning tone began to announce they were low on fuel. Following in-flight policy, they radioed the tower with the update. The response remained the same: sit tight and remain in the holding pattern. We'll tell you when it's right to move. As they reached the outer airport beacon, the radio crackled to life. You're cleared to land. Cleared to land. Go, now! After receiving the wind speed and runway number, the pilots, utilizing their air maps, which they studied, carefully adjusted for their landing, and based on GPS coordinates, they lined up their craft for the landing, anticipating they're going to have to do this blindly. But as soon as they descended, they said they cleared the cloud bank, and immediately one area of the airport became visible, which happened to be the runway. They ended up landing without any issues because they trusted the tower and they listened to their instructions to sit tight and stick to the holding pattern. In a similar way, the Hebrews who were in exile were told by God to sit tight and stick to the holding pattern. As uncomfortable as those pilots must have been when the tower told them to sit tight while an alarm system was warning of low fuel, so the Hebrews must have experienced something similar as well. The Hebrews had been forcibly removed from their homeland, and the glory years and heroic stories of David, Saul, and Solomon were becoming worn-out memories. There was a fear that only the elderly would recall Israel and Judah, and these stories would be forgotten as the youth and young adults adapted to the Babylonian way of life. The warning bells and the alarms are going off as a fear that the past and the faith traditions would fade away. Yet even as this increasing fear constantly urged them to leave Babylon, Jeremiah's proclamation that God had said, "Stay put," demanded that they stay still. Granted, this proclamation was disappointing, but they understood that based on their current situation, they had attempted to do it their own way in the past, and the results were quite unpleasant, as it was even now present as they viewed their past decisions as being the reason they are exiled from the Holy Land. Begrudgingly, they acknowledged Jeremiah's wisdom, and attempting to make sense of it, they sought out answers in the Torah. There they found in the Mosaic writings insight to God's assurance that they would remain in God's sight. This led them to embrace later the declaration of Psalm 90, which proclaims, 1,000 years in your sight are like yesterday when it's past, which was revised centuries later in Peter's letter to the churches to read, with the Lord, one day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years are like one day. The psalmist's observation and Jeremiah's advice gave the Hebrew exiles relief, as together they were assured their captivity and freedom was based on God's will. These writings reminded them that they were led by God, and if God chose to lead them home, then they would be told to go. In the meantime, they remained in the in-between time. This was a period of life in which they were simply in a holding pattern. This is when Jeremiah encouraged them to live into their present situation as God wanted them here, wherever here was at the moment, while also remaining open to the idea that God would one day say, go. While encouraging, His declaration was painful and challenging. It is a difficulty that the world's refugees have had to endure in various time frames and around the globe, whether they are fugitives from warfare and violence or avoiding starvation during times of drought or as global weather patterns continue to change. Some refugees have been on the move all their lives, like the political refugees located in a Haitian camp in the Dominican Republic, or perhaps the refugees in the West Bank. In both of these instances, whole generations of refugees have been born in these settings, yet they are told about a place other than there called home, which are stories dimly remembered and told by misty-eyed elders. Even at the time of Jesus' birth, he became a refugee as Mary and Joseph fled to Egypt to avoid a homicidal king. As Joseph, Mary, and present refugees who are escaping gang violence in Venezuela or a war in Ukraine are realizing, there is no quick and easy fix to their situation, as they are, in many cases, told to sit and wait and maintain a holding pattern. Still, as bleak as this feeling was for the ancient Hebrews, they found consolation in Jeremiah's advice, which is similar wise counsel for us as well. When we encounter a problem or an unpleasant life situation, so our heads are spinning round and we can't seem to find solid ground under our feet, we're encouraged to find meaning within the situation instead of outside the situation. This can be challenging when we're still in the midst of feeling like we're exiles, whether this is due to the ongoing challenges and changes of COVID, or with the ever-changing political landscape and frustration that political parties are still talking past each other and not with each other. Or it just seems the rhetoric, cultural changes, and with it the technological changes which are causing us to feel alienated, perhaps refugees in a foreign world. Perhaps this has caused many of us to want to throw our hands up in the air and potentially pack our bags and divorce ourselves from society, politics, and culture. We wouldn't be the first ones who have considered the church living in exile, as this thought is to be in the world but not of it was presented by H. Richard Niebuhr 71 years ago. This thought was adopted by many groups, but still a counterpoint to his view has come to light. Although it's not a new one, this was presented in 1989. But this idea has been picking up steam more recently with the claim that instead of foregoing the world and living in exile, instead we awaken and live into the here, where God has delivered us to make the world credible to the gospel. This is done by engaging the world and caring for neighbors and contributing to the discussions of life and declaring where we see God in action right now in the here, wherever here is. And in the discussion, avoid focusing on what God can do after death. Life after death is an important theological discussion. While our living in the world and providing solutions and healing at this moment is vital for now, as this closely follows Jesus' example, who engaged the situation. We engage with the right now as a response to God saying, sit tight, don't go anywhere. Sure, the alarms are going off, and we might want to panic, yet we don't, because we know God is with us and is ready to move with us. Live in the here, wherever God has said here is at this point in time. This is the advice from some modern theologians and authors, and this is the advice Jeremiah provided the Hebrews over 2,500 years ago. With this advice, Jeremiah became the first theologian who spoke about how to live in a world where we feel like we're exiles in it. And who knew best than Jeremiah, who spoke before the exile, during the exile, and as one who was exiled. Jeremiah boldly insists that the Hebrews live into their moment. Sure, he says, we wish we had a temple. We don't. We wish we lived in the great city of Jerusalem and could separate ourselves from the world with her tall walls and gates, but we can't. We wish we could still sing our songs in Judah, but we can't. With this last lament, our lamentation seemingly connects us to the Hebrew exiles, We wish we could sing and praise God without having to wear medical masks, or join in person with the persons who are joining us on Zoom this morning, and vice versa. Or we hope and pray that we could visit places without fear or worry about the plethora of viruses that are out there. Still, Jeremiah's advice was relevant in his day as it remains in our own. He tells them to reimagine their destination. Since for the Hebrews, the destination of what they viewed as home had changed, this proved good advice as unknown to Jeremiah, getting home when it happened for another 70 years. Jeremiah told them their destination is Babylon, so live into it. And don't move until God moves. And by the way, he adds, God is not moving yet. He counsels them to recognize that their Hebrew identity is not tied to a specific location. They are still God's people, a people of faith, a people of religious traditions, and this will occur wherever they are, wherever here is located. Reimagining the destination, he encourages them to imagine that wherever they are located, God is there. Reimagine how you view worship and traditions and recognize how God is present. Imagine finding God in unexpected places and recognize what God is doing, no matter how strange or bizarre. And imagine where you are located is where you are supposed to be. So live into it and pray for its prosperity. This is the gist of verse 7 when he writes, "Seek the welfare of the city where I've sent you into exile, and pray to the Lord on her behalf, for in her welfare you will find your welfare." And as we know from the end of Jeremiah, God eventually did tell the people to go, and they went right away and landed in a place where their hearts had longed to be located. In this way, pray for your situation, and pray for our land's prosperity, or wherever we might land. But meanwhile, sit tight, ready to go, and then go when God says so. Meanwhile, we can review the flight safety instructions, which as we know are the Holy Scriptures, and recognize that God remains faithful throughout history, no matter where the journey lands us. Then embrace where we are. On the back of our minds, we are ready to go, only when God says so.